Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Now that we have seen the control structures that we can use, one writes functions which has these control structures to do certain tasks that we want to do. So in this module, we are going to look at how you write these functions, how do you open R script files, and how do you use these kinds of for loops, if loops, while loops within the functions. So that's what we're going to see in this module. So whenever we talk about a function in R, a function is some program which accepts input arguments and then manipulates those input arguments using valid R commands and then gives out an output. So a typical function looks like this. You have f is function. It takes certain set of arguments, runs these arguments through R statements, and then finally comes up with an output which is useful for whatever task that we want to do. The very first step in creating a function is to create an R script, and we had seen this in the very first part of our teaching here. What you do is you look at the R Studio, go to the File tab, look at R script, and then start creating a new R script. And in the previous module, I had showed that there are two ways of doing it. One is you could go directly to File and do this, or you could use the tab right below and get the R script going. Once you have the R script going, what you do is you start typing the text that is the function. So the syntax is very simple. Here we are simply trying to calculate the volume of a cylinder. So you have to define an output variable. Let's define that output variable as volume cylinder. So volume cylinder is going to be a function of the diameter and the length of the cylinder. So when we write a function for calculating the volume of cylinder, the two arguments that we would need to calculate the volume would be the diameter and length. So in the function definition, we say volume cylinder equal to function, and the arguments are diameter and length. And we could have simply said diameter length. Here we also give a default value, which is diameter equal to 5, length equal to 100. And once you go inside the function, the volume is basically calculated as pi diameter squared times length by 4, which is the formula that you see. And the output from this function is the volume of diameter, so you're returning volume. The key thing to notice here is you also name the file as volumecylinder.r. So once you name the file also as volumecylinder.r, then you can go to the console of the R Studio, and when you invoke volume cylinder with appropriate arguments, then the volume of the cylinder will be returned. So once you write that, you basically save it. We have seen this before. The browser will show up, you save or save as, and then you're going to save this as volumecylinder.r. Once you save, before executing this, you have to load the function. So keep in mind that whenever you want to run a function, you have to load it, and only then you can run the function. Once you load the function using the command that's shown there, we had already seen this before. You can run this function either using source. Remember, we talked about source and source with echo, or you could run with using the tab run, where you could either run the file line by line or run the whole file. So there are these two ways of running the program. So invoking the function from the console, first we source, basically we load the function, and then let's say we say v, which is what we're going to call as the volume that we're calculating, and I'm going to call the function volume cylinder with two arguments, 5 and 10. In this case, I'm saying the diameter of the cylinder is 5 and the length of the cylinder is 10, and you get the result 196.3495. And if you go to the environment window, you would see that you have V as the volume of cylinder that is calculated, and you would also see the functions that you have loaded, which is volume cylinder that you have loaded for doing this. So there are many ways in which we can access this volume cylinder. One way is to actually pass arguments to the function and then try to calculate the volume of cylinder, which is what we show here in the slide. So we say volume is volume cylinder 5, 10, which basically says 5 is the diameter of the cylinder and 10 is the length of the cylinder. And then you get a volume which is 196.3495. Now let's see what happens if we access this function without the arguments. So on the right hand side I have volume is volume cylinder. Now the answer is 1963.495. It still computes a volume of cylinder without any arguments. This is because while we defined the volume cylinder function at the beginning, we had given some default values. If you remember, we gave a default value of 5 for the diameter and 100 for the length. So this volume is 10 times more than the volume that you would calculate when you give 5 and 10 as arguments. And as you see 1963.495 as a result of this. Now, if you use the identifiers to pass arguments to the function, apply simplifies this. It says volume, which will turn out to be the result here, is apply the function volume cylinder on dia and length. But notice this dia is now a vector of many diameters and length is a vector of many lengths. So at one shot you apply this volume cylinder and get the volumes of several cylinders all at one time. You can also use other commands such as tapply, which is shown here. What we would like you to do is try tapply on your own and understand. Then it really does not matter what order in which you are passing the argument. In the first case, when you say volume is volume cylinder 5, 10 without any identifier, then it is going to automatically assume that the first argument is for the diameter and the second argument is for the length. Now, if you actually wanted to pass the length as the first argument and diameter as the second argument, it is possible if you use the identifier to go with it. So this is what we show here. Volume is volume cylinder, length equal to 10, dia equal to 5, and you get the same result 196.3495. Because though we have sent this in a different order, we have used the identifier with the argument to send it to the function file. So in R, to keep flexibility with programming, functions are generally lazily evaluated, which means that if there are certain arguments that the function is looking for and you do not provide them and those arguments are not used in the function, there are no errors that are returned. So for example, let's say we define volume cylinder as a function of diameter, length and something called radians, RAD. Now notice inside the function, the volume only uses the diameter and length to return volume. Now you would think that whenever I invoke volume cylinder, I should invoke it with 3 arguments. But in the first case, we are invoking it with only 2 arguments, diameter is 5 and length equal to 10. I still get a result for volume which is 196.3495. Though I didn't provide any value for RAD, since that was not used within the function, there was no error that was thrown. However, in the second example, we do the same thing, but if you look at the function form, inside we have volume that we are computing, and then we have a command which says print rad and then return volume. Now when you try to run this function with diameter and length alone, you will get an error saying rad is missing because that is something that is part of a function which R is not able to find out what that is. So as long as these are arguments which do not matter in terms of the computations inside the function, R will still lazily evaluate it and not throw errors while you are evaluating these functions. In summary, you can open a function file by clicking the icon that is there, or going to file and then opening a new file or opening an already existing file. You can save the function. Keep in mind you have to keep the function file name as the same as the function name. So in the previous case, volume cylinder was a function name and the R file was volume cylinder.r. Once you do this, you have to invoke the function every time you want to run by pressing source, and you invoke the function with the right number of inputs to execute the function after loading the function by pressing this button. Now, if you close and start a session, clear the console, and then let's say you are in the same folder and then you're trying to run volume cylinder 510, it says I cannot find volume cylinder. This is because every time you have to, once you clear the console, you have to load the function again before that can be invoked. So in this case, though volume cylinder is there, it says it cannot find the function, but once you load the function, you will be able to work with volume cylinder.